Volume 4 C7. Ainz emerged in the throne room which, in his absence, was empty except for Sixus. No sooner than he appeared, the maid gave a deep curtsy, holding her black and white maid outfit to the sides, crossing her feet at the ankles, and bending her knees with her head bowed. "Welcome back, my lord," she said to him with a smile on her face. "Thank you, but why are you alone here?" Ainz asked, and the maid spoke without raising her head. "Lord Sabos ordered that the places my lord visits most should always have a maid stationed ready for your service at any time. As this is the seat of power for my lord, here I am at your service." "Does that mean you are given no days off for rest or recreation at all?" Ainz asked, his lips pursed behind the mask. The maid all but recoiled. "My lord." She covered her mouth with one hand and almost lost her posture. Dropping one half of her dress curtsy pose, she hastily picked it back up to resume her position. "Nobody would dare to think of time away from serving you. Still, that amount of work is unhealthy. I will speak with Sabos about this when I return, but in the meantime, I have a guest. You can see to him as you would myself." Ainz stepped aside to reveal the gawking Zanbru. "A realm of gods, a realm of gods, a realm of gods. This is a realm of gods. It has to be, there's nothing else. No mere mortals, no beings of this world could create something like this." Zanbru's warrior heart never quailed in all his brave life, and yet in the company of one who mastered life and death, and seeing the realm which that being inhabited, his spirit had never felt smaller. The towering high ceiling, the walls with intricate smoothness, and statues that could not have been made by mortal hands. Their perfect smoothness made the river stones he'd seen on his journey appear to be rougher than a craggy gorge by comparison. His eyes beheld the throne, at the peak of steps that fairly dared any fool to climb them. The throne radiated power and its promise. He could not even bear to look for long. "Zanbru, this is Sixus, one of our maids. She will tend to you tonight while you rest. Return here after you have eaten, bathed, and slept until morning." Ainz gave the command, and it was all Zanbru could do to bob his head up and down like a puppet on shaking strings. Zanbru's entire body was a-tremble with reverence, awe, and fear. His heart throbbed and ached at the majesty about him, and the god who fed his people seemed all the more godlike. "Demiurge, Zanbru, I will see you in the morning. I have things to do." Ainz made the cryptic statement, and the archdevil bowed his head. "Of course, my lord, of course," he said, and when Ainz was gone Demiurge looked down at the little lizard man. "Lizard man, your attitude toward your master is proper, but remember this, you are in his home, and we are all the creations of those he loved best. Disrespect towards any one of them, even one generously assigned to care for you, will be dealt with harshly. I trust we understand each other?" Demiurge stared through empty crystalline eyes, and at that the lizard man bobbed his head. "I wouldn't even consider it. Not in such a sacred place," Zanbru said in a hushed whisper so full of awe that Demiurge wasn't even entirely sure the lizard man understood he was being threatened. But it was a good answer either because of, or in spite of that. "Good. Sixus, represent your master well," Demiurge said with far more kindness. She politely inclined her head to the guardian. "Naturally, Lord Demiurge," she said, and reached out a hand to gently touch the still awestruck lizard man. "If you'll come with me?" she asked, and like a lost child finding an adult and instinctively going where they led, he followed after her, his eyes looking at every piece of art as if it were a divine treasure, which to the denizens there, they were. The maid said nothing to the lizard man as she led him on to the baths. When they arrived he said, "You make lakes of stone." It was an understandable mistake, given the sheer size of the baths, but it made Sixus laugh. "You're a funny one, my lord. No, these are not lakes. Just a place where the supreme beings and their creations bathe." "Created. That word. Strange way to say chosen," Zanbru remarked as he stepped toward the babbling flowing fountain. "We were not chosen, we were created. The supreme beings designed us and brought us to life to serve their needs. I was created by Lord Whitebrim." The honey blonde-haired maid straightened up and brushed her long blonde hair back. "He also designed our clothing," she ran a hand over the smooth fabric, "and our personalities. We were designed as you see us." "There are others?" Zanbru asked as the heat of the water engulfed his scales and the filth of his travels began to pull away from his body. "There were," Sixus said, and at this her head hung. "They disappeared, the great ones, one by one. They went off to some other world where only gods can tread and we could not. the world we knew was going to end. And the one you know, he was the one who stayed with us, resolving that we shouldn't be left alone. Many of us believe he carried us to this world so that we wouldn't die with the world of Shiti devs. Those vile beings that chose to destroy all things. And our master saved us. Her eyes welled up with tears. Forgive my prattling. But you should know the glory of the one you call your king. There is none more suitable to be our lord, or the lord of this world. We know many stories of many kings, even though we never left our home, and know that most kings and queens were very cruel. But our own is merciful and kind. Devote yourself to his cause, and the world will be safe for all your children for as long as this world endures. Zenbru internalized her every word. You are not the first our master has saved. He rescued 8 humans and granted them great power. Even as we speak they go to work his will. Loyal service is rewarded with prosperity, power, and happiness. Remember that, guest from the lizardman tribes, she said. The admonition to remember was unneeded. It was impossible to forget, so impossible that even the sumptuous meal he had afterward could not compare, and he only slept at all because it seemed his bed was enchanted to assist him in doing so. There is no future apart from service to the king. It was his first thought when he awoke, and when Zenbru prostrated himself before Ainzulgaon in the throne room again a mere quarter of an hour later, he did so with a deep reverence in his heart. Volume 48. Ain's dreams of albedo were no less erotic than before, and the guilt of having them was like a mountain on his heart. So much so, that all he wanted to do was leave the room. His subordinates were ready to go as he expected, little needed to be said, and so nothing was. Surrounded by the finery of the making of the 41, he opened the gate and left Nazarick behind again. They appeared in the same place from which they previously departed and began to make their way toward the mountains of the dwarves. Being away from the place of guilt did wonders for his spirit, not to mention being surrounded by nature in a way that was impossible in his native world. Memories of home, however, were weaker than before. Little was reflected on, except for those bright memories of his 40 friends. After hours of hiking over high hills and through thick woods, they emerged onto an open plain from which the view of the mountains became crystal clear. The luminous light of the early day glinted off the dew of the grass, making the field appear to be a carpet of diamonds glinting in the day. The gentle breeze caressed his body, though concealed as he was, he barely felt anything on his skin. Ainz glanced behind him at Demiurge. He searched the archdevil's face, and asked himself, what am I looking for in him? It wasn't long before Ainz realized it. He was searching for wonder, or, does he marvel at the beauty of this world as I do? Lupus Regina greatly enjoyed the outdoors, and even made friends. Inasmuch as she is able to. Could he? Demiurge was designed to be the pinnacle of evil. After the cruel CEOs who wrecked our world. But also loyal to his own. Cunning and ruthless, a devil through and through. Can someone like that take pleasure in this existence? Ainz, however, had looked too long, and Demiurge was not the sort to miss the eyes of his master, even masked, falling on him. My lord, can I serve you in some way? Demiurge's tail lashed at his back, but his crystalline eyes revealed nothing, nor could they. His voice was smooth as a knife's edge, of a slightly higher pitch, and without any hint of hesitation in anything he said or asked. No, Demiurge. I was just thinking. How do you think your creator would see all this? Ainz asked and resumed his walk on the long dirt trail as Zenbru waved back at them, indicating it was safe. My lord, I don't understand, forgive my feeble mind, could you please explain? Demiurge's mouth closed tightly to await his lord's answer. No, of course he wouldn't understand that question. Ainz thought and asked instead, do you think he would enjoy seeing a world which looked like this? Would he appreciate it, regard it as art? Or just a thing to be built on and used? As they resumed their walk, Demiurge looked down at the dust and dirt, folding his hands behind his back as he took up position at Ain's left side. My lord, I would not dream to speak for the mind of a supreme being. But if I may offer my own opinion, Lord Albert helped with the baths and the lake, and when he helped with the baths, integrated nature into the workmanship. I believe my creator would have seen this, found it good, and chosen to use his incalculable genius in such a way as to use it without destroying it. Ainz brought his white-gloved hand up to his chin and stroked it while the stroll went on. That does sound like Hulbert. But is it also? Ainz hesitated, gauging more about the dangerous archdevil meant for roundabout questioning, and some things could only be sought head-on. Your view? I do as the Supreme Being's command of me, Demiurge replied. And if you were allowed to follow your own designs for this world, if I had not remained and you had instead, along with Nazarick, have been sent here alone? Ainz asked. The kingdoms of this world are many and destructive. Without the supreme will of our lords, of course I would bring down the kingdoms of the many races and put them under one rule, then the world would be better off, break down their numbers a great deal. Demiurge went on and on, detailing the ways in which he would have punished the leadership of the nations and kingdoms for their existence. As he watched the archdevil and listened to him, it was like hearing one of Albert's rants about the corrupt being in charge. They get all they do, and what do? Bring destruction with it. They ruin everything, all the time, everything. They call it a modest proposal to use our blood to lubricate their machines. He was all but seeing the top hat-wearing, goat-headed avatar of his friend smacking the table and the zero-damage indicator appearing. Nostalgia swept over him as he listened to the horrors Demiurge would inflict if he were given leave to do so, and yet for all that nostalgia, the unbridled torments the archdevil intended were gruesome and gory enough to prickle every one of Ain's instincts. The horrifying realization hit him. Demiurge intends to do this to humans. I am human. Again. For now. I could defeat and escape from him with relative ease. But if he does not accept me, he will never stop trying to destroy me. Other than Albedo, if there is one whom I must remove, it is the one in front of me now. Could I do it? Could I really kill Albert's son to save myself? Ainz asked, and his fingers twitched inside his gloves. He folded his hands behind his back and clenched the outer fist tight in the palm of the other. He was so lost in thought while Demiurge went on that he almost didn't notice when Zanbaru stopped walking. The lizard man was looking toward the mountain right enough, but though it loomed as only a mountain could, he stopped walking toward it. The reason why became evident a moment later when Ainz stopped. The path branched in two directions. You are lost? Ainz asked him, and the lizard man hung his head and said, Forgive me, my lord. It's been years since I've come this way and I just don't recall exactly which way I went. Give me a few minutes, if you please, I will recall, I'm sure. Demiurge was clearly agitated by the request, expecting a supreme being to wait while the archdevil trembled with outrage until Ainz held up a hand. He was not created as you were. Had he known he would one day come this way again, I'm sure he would have made a point of remembering. Ainz consoled the lizard man, who nodded rapidly under the wave of malice that seeped off of Demiurge. I can help you remember, Ainz offered, and made a point of keeping himself as the focus of Zanbaru's eyes. I can look through your memory. It is a painless process, though I haven't got the most experience with it. You should be fine. As you command, my lord. If my body is yours, so is the rest of me. Zanbaru replied, and the malice of Demiurge vanished like a fog blown away in the wind. Then be seated, relax yourself, and I will begin. Ainz instructed, and Zanbaru did as he was commanded, sat himself awkwardly on the dust, closed his eyes and took a deep, slow breath. I am ready, my lord, Zanbaru said at last, keeping his eyes shut to receive his lord's magic. Volume 4 C9. Memory turned out to be a tricky thing. How long ago was this? It will be easier if I know when it was. 4 or 5 years ago, my lord. Zanbaru replied without opening his eyes. I see, simply stay relaxed. Ainz instructed as reassuringly as he could, and the lizard man then shifted a little uncomfortably, clearing his throat. He waited. With the spell in full effect, Ainz began to sort through the mental fog. Everything was a blur, everything was confusion. A grey mist surrounded Ainz. If only I had practice with this. Ainz thought with embittered frustration. The more recent memories began to come into view. Is that what I really look like? He asked himself when he got to memories of seeing himself. In Zanbaru's memories, Ainz saw himself much taller than he appeared to be. If I were more experienced, could I shift the view to something closer to the truth? Am I seeing only his perceptions? Or is that all memory is, imperfect perceptions? I have no way to test it, and this may be important one day. Ainz sifted further. As he did, the deeper he went, the thicker the grey fog around them became. Even drawing closer in his walk through Zanbaru's mind, the memories themselves became somewhat fuzzy. Curiously, his meeting with Zariasu stood out a great deal, the fight which killed him. Zariasu seemed much taller and broader than Ainz knew him actually to be. So perception influences memory. I should have expected that. Ainz made a mental note and moved deeper into time. He felt himself all but sprinting past images. Village life among the lizardmen was fundamentally dull, but it was oddly tranquil. A brief morning common meal, time on the lake in their little boats, some combat practice, but otherwise just enjoying life. Almost like a vacation. Ainz mused, live, fish, eat, mate, raise children, die. Though the lizardman tribal war proved a brutal thing. His tribe lost a third of their numbers. What must that be like? Those you grew up with, and then so many missing faces all at one go in just a few weeks? What he did next left a feeling of wrongness roiling in his gut. He watched Zunbaru go out onto the lake in the middle of the night, dive into the water, and wail beneath the placid surface where none could hear his pain. Was he going out to end his life? The question hung in his mind, but guilt over invading his privacy farther than he should have gave Ainz pause. He couldn't bring himself to look further. But if Zunbaru was typical of the lizardman, and in this sense it seemed likely, no wonder they embraced me so quickly. Even if they defeated the frogmen, they would have lost another 30% or better of their numbers. Perhaps they would have lost so many that they would have been doomed. One more such Pyrrhic victory and they would have been lost. Pity swelled for the lizardmen, to lose so many of their comrades. A terrible thing. Focus, Ainz, focus. He told himself and pushed deeper into memory. Finally he found sight of Zunbaru leaving a mountain entrance where two dwarves stood guard. Found it. He moved somewhat deeper into time. Drinking. Lots of drinking. Dwarves. All of whom seem to look alike. Are they actually like that? Or is this also perception? The dwarves at least seemed to like their beer a great deal. They were also notably big on beards, with every one of them seemingly having a thick one that went down half their bodies. Do they have no women, or do their women also have beards? Idle curiosity and unimportant, but it was a strange thought to have. Finally he found the moment Zunbaru entered the mountain, and the fog of time thickened, the vision weakened, until at last Ainz found himself looking at the fuzzy, fog-shrouded outline of Zunbaru at the fork on which they now stood, and the direction he took, to the right. Ainz cancelled the spell, and found himself back in his own mind again. I am finished, you may rise, Zunbaru. I have what I need. Yes, it's this way. Ainz pointed down the path, and Zunbaru gave a nod. Yes, that feels right somehow. My lord must be correct. The lizard man stood up, stretched, and resumed the long steady walk back the way he'd come years before. Now settled in, and briefly distracted, and perhaps enamored with some of Zunbaru's more pleasant memories of daily life in the village, Ainz began to hum a travelling song of the sort once used by Albert. It was an almost bouncy little song torn from the pages of a favourite fiction Ainz no longer recalled the name of. The mountain drew closer and loomed larger with every passing hour, the long walk gradually bringing them to the point where they were at last in its shadow. The terrain became craggy, more grey and less green. For 3 days they went that way, pausing at night, returning to Nazarick. And every morning, Ainz awoke from dreams of Albedo's body entwined with his own, with guilt just piling onto guilt. Finally they ceased to walk straight ahead. A long steady path curved upward along the mountain ridge. The great stone that jutted up from the depths of time, obscured the sun as they ascended, jutting crags on the long winding path that must have stood for countless ages, and yet somehow looked as if they would topple over to crush the lot of them at any moment. The wind began to pick up, to howl and become cold as ice. Zunbaru began to shiver. And it was then that Ainz stopped, and felt profoundly foolish. I neglected to think of what taking him out of his natural environment unprotected would be like. I could cast a spell to warm him, or draw an item from my inventory, but perhaps this is far enough for him. At this point we're on a path directly to an entrance. We can do without him now. Since I'm a human they shouldn't have the same bigotry that I might experience if I were coming to them as one of the undead. That settled it. Zunbaru, Ainz said, stopping in his tracks. The lizard man turned around and seeing the way his lord had straightened up, sensing eyes focused on him from beyond the mask, he knelt. My lord? Zunbaru asked, his entire body shivering with cold in an altitude high enough that snow was clearly visible on the peaks. Ainz, in his moment of panic, could within mere minutes of flight, to escape the pressures of his duties and do something as simple and absurd as taking fresh snow for a homemade snow cone. Ainz improvised as fast as he could, grasping the quickest excuse he could come up with to get rid of the lizard man without seeming like a bad boss for making him needlessly suffer this long before noticing the discomfort. You bled for your people and froze for me. You have done enough. I permit you to rest within Nazarick as a reward for good service. I will send you back to your people when I return. Zenbrew shivered again, but this time with more excitement than discomfort. My lord. I will grind myself to the dust for you if he began, but Ainz raised the white-gloved hand. For now, you will rest, relax and enjoy yourself. Happiness is the reward of loyalty. Ainz promised, and summoned a gate for the lizard man to pass through. Inform whatever made you see on the other side of what I have said here today. Ainz added, hopefully they will take that to heart and let me give them more time off. He didn't consider that very likely, but maybe. At once, my lord. Zenbrew stood up, bowed, and passed through the gate. Demiurge, let's make the rest of this journey alone. It looks like we're nearly there, Ainz said and looked at the winding path that curved upward along the mountain slope. Yes, my lord. It appears so. Demiurge replied, and they resumed their walk to the peak with only the howling winds for company.